what's happening everyone? Pragmatic Addict here. So, I actually just recorded this video, and I don't know what happened, but my mic just kind of crapped out on me, so if this is a little bit shorter, if I'm a little bit faster about talking, if I'm a little bit less enthusiastic, just know, let's hope this is the one. So, I've been looking forward to this movie for weirdly enough, no real big reason. I just saw the trailer and I saw Paul Giamatti's character in it and I was like, Paul Giamatti looks like he's going to be an absolute fucking blast in that movie. It is also a film from Focus Features, which is just usually a studio I try to catch their films from anyway. But as this film actually got closer to release, it actually garnered critical acclaim. This is also a film that is releasing to the public on November 10th. It got some select showings on the 27th. It got like that limited run, but this film does release on the 10th of November in my city. But my screener for this film was today, and I couldn't wait to fucking see this film. And I honestly can't wait to talk about it. This film, I absolutely loved it. So let's just not waste any more time. Let's get into the Holdovers. Now, one reason why I may not have been looking forward to this movie in the traditional sense was probably just because I didn't really know what its goal was. I didn't know exactly what it was aiming for. To the point where after seeing this trailer like a few times in the theaters, I really started to analyze it and take notes, and I was like, okay, so it's absolutely fucking laugh out loud hilarious in the first portion, and then it turns into some pretty hard-hitting drama, it seems, and then it seems like it's going to tackle and have some themes of, you know, your typical coming-of-age indie film. So really quickly, guys, the plot for this film reads, set in the early 1970s, the film follows Paul Hunnam, a disliked teacher at Barton Academy who's responsible for supervising students who are unable to return home for the Christmas holidays. During this process, Hunnam is forced to deal with one particularly rebellious but troubled student, Angus, who is grieving the loss of his father. And just for me, getting that clarification in the premise just kind of hits home. And you can see how this could be a comedy. This is not really a spoiler at all. This is kind of hinted at in the trailer. You know, Paul Giamatti plays this heavily disliked teacher. He kind of meets his match more or less with this rebellious, troublesome student named Angus. They kind of butt heads. You really wouldn't expect them to kind of gain this bond, but over time you can see that maybe they do kind of develop a relationship. This felt very heartfelt. It looked like this film was gonna do a really good job at tugging at your heartstrings while juggling and balancing different genres and themes. So I was just really curious to see what we were gonna get out of this movie. So right off the bat, this is just immediately out of this 2-hour plus movie. This was one of the most beautiful looking films I had seen all year. It just captures that heartfelt, nostalgic, winter, holiday dramedy so fucking well. And I know you hear this just all the time nowadays in any good movie that comes out, but I am really glad I got to see this film on the big screen because it is nostalgic in the sense where it just feels like a simpler time. It feels refreshing. It feels inspiring. And this was just simply a movie that I was not expecting it to hit me so intensely. But just going back to the look and the feel of the movie, it's not just the way that the film is marketed or like how it looks, but it's also just its tone and its pacing, its directing. This is a film where the director knew exactly what how he wanted to tell it, how it wanted to hit audience, what it wanted to resemble, and honestly, it is an indie film in the best looking way possible. And also, the students here, they do the same exact thing. Just seeing their first introductions coming on screen, having like a taste of their chemistry and their behavior, their attitudes with each other, and just in general. Not just the movie in general, but every portion that went into this film just feels like part of a movie that wouldn't be made today. And I think the biggest takeaway, or at least one of the biggest takeaways, there are a lot that I'm going to get into, but one of the biggest takeaways from this film for me was just how it made me feel. But going back to the students, the main character in particular, or at least the main character of the students, Angus. So before seeing this, I didn't really know like what he was going to offer to the film. I thought that the standout, or like who was going to be in the spotlight, was Paul Giamatti. You know, he was kind of the big standout of the trailer. He was really eccentric. He was really comedic. Paul Giamatti is like more or less the bigger name actor in this movie. But immediately when you like first get your glimpse at this student, just seeing that alone and just what we've gotten from Giamatti in his introductions alone, you're already so excited because you just feel, just based off of everything that in the movie that you've gotten just within like these first few minutes, how far the bar is gonna raise for these characters. But as actual just acting, Paul Giamatti absolutely eats this film up. He absolutely stands the fuck out in this film. And especially for the film's heartfelt and like really humane, deep tone, he just stands out in such an animated way. But one thing I really want to talk about in this film is actually its humor. So seeing a movie like this, just seeing its trailer, seeing how it's marketed, and just kind of like reading the premise, you kind of go in this film knowing what you're going to be getting, more or less. You know, this indie film that is going to have a lot of these different themes, is going to, you know, not really contribute to like the mainstream audience. And I definitely like agree with that. This film has a really dry, really deadpan sense of humor. And I think that it's written and comes off in a way, like, honestly, just everything else in this movie, where you really only get it, and it can only really land with you if you really know what you're expecting, and more or less kind of knowing what, like what a film like this is going to be giving out. Again, just based off of the marking, like I said earlier. That I think, again, if, like, this movie doesn't hit you on a personal or humane, like, realistic level, then it may actually just fall flat for you. Depending on this film, on how this film makes you feel by the end of it, and just what it does to you throughout its runtime, how it makes you feel on the inside, I can really see it just falling flat for a lot of people, because it is a film that deeply, like, asks for just analyzing. This is a film that is, you know, I think delivered to people that really think and really analyze, and, you know, maybe those introverted writer types. You know, I'm not trying to make this sound like your indie picture, but it really is just an indie film at its core, through and through. But going back to like the humor, for example, it's, if you can follow it, it just flows so well with everything else in this movie to really just make it, like, in its outcome, just really feel like a full meal. An initial standout for me, for example, was there's a scene where everyone is joined up in a chapel, and it's for like prayer and everything, for a service for someone who had passed away. And just with the context of like the scene and everything, you really get a good back and forth between Paul Giamatti's character and this student Angus, and just you really get the first taste at who they're actually like as individual people. And depending on like what we're teased on at in the movie, if they were to really get really close and kind of go head to head and, you know, like butt heads or whatever, it just made that land so much better. Now, what I also will say, kind of going back to like how I felt with the humor and everything, the film can come off a little bit too strong and a little bit overboard, to the point where even like me personally, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Which is like, for example, characters. There are times where the film can kind of, like its humor, it can like flesh out some characters, and it can focus on some characters in some certain situations. And honestly, it just kind of gives you no heads up, and it just stands out in the way where certain things are specifically more eccentric than others, while like majority of the rest of the film up to this point can feel like contained, I guess. But what stood out to me more was just how the film transpires and unravels. It feels like a story, like a real story that's being told. As you're seeing it, you're understanding more, therefore you're wanting more. And it all just contributes and feels like a painting or like a picture that when it first starts out, you really don't know what it's going for. You really don't know how you feel about it. But once that picture is made a little bit more clear as it goes on, it just looks more beautiful. You just understand it more. You want to see more of it. You just care about it more, especially between the characters of Paul Giamatti and the student Angus. It feels necessary as to why all of these students were following his story, and why we're following Paul Giamatti as a teacher, and just what becomes of his and Paul Giamatti's character. It's so humane. And it's the thing where it's the behavior and the reactions based off of the core of what's going on in their characters' stories. You know, how they cope with it, and how it goes to the lengths of sometimes bizarre humor or deeply realistic, hard-hitting life lessons. Again, it's all about how this film makes you feel as a person, how it resembles with you, how you reflect off of it, and just how it makes you feel on the inside. And going back to the humane setting and feel of the film, as you see the story's layout and pacing, just seeing these two grow as separate characters with separate backgrounds and separate demographics, just can't help but want to understand who these characters are and what the story is trying to tell and the picture that it's really trying to paint. Another really interesting thing I wanted to note was just the locations and landmarks throughout the film. For example, there's this scene where they go to a restaurant and they go to this Christmas party. And it's that kind of thing where it doesn't sound like that crucial and it wouldn't come off that crucial, but just based off of what this film's main center is, you know, just seeing all these characters at the school, Paul Giamatti and the student, but also just this worker and her story, what we're limited to seeing them when they're at this school and what kind of effect that has on them, you know, being stuck at this school, forcing to kind of live with each other more or less, that when they're actually out in the world and doing normal life things like, you know, going to events, going to restaurants, going to Christmas parties, even just going on trips and seeing the city, you feel that the film is always trying to tell a specific thing here. It's trying to give you more description to who these characters are, what they're dealing with, and just their backgrounds. That it feels really exciting because it feels very specific, it feels very necessary. And honestly, just as the film went on, it really just kind of became an extremely tough pill to swallow. To some degree, you can kind of see it coming. The usage of its humor and themes, for example, in the movie. You kind of have to really understand it for it to land, and with saying that, it's not just like funny writing, but the whole movie is just a showcase of how all these different characters are all coping with different, really personal, really hard-hitting and realistic struggles. And just how they feed off each other and just really understanding them and hearing them. This film just hit me on a very, actually personal level that was just spot on, that I almost felt like I had a bone to pick. And what it came down to, guys, is just by the end, I couldn't believe that all I had watched and all that I was seeing was just a screenplay that was written, was just a story that was being told. Just how realistically and maturely it was handled, and just how much of it I really just not only underestimated, but I was not prepared for, and just how personal it became. It was refreshing, it was uplifting, it was cleansing, it was inspiring, and honestly, I was just in tears and in love with this film by the end. Again, I think what's going to make this film land is just how hard it hits you on the inside and just how this film makes you feel on a humane level. I can see it falling flat just like if it doesn't hit you on those levels, but also if it does hit you on those kind of levels, I can really see this as being one of the most profound and just biggest takeaway films that you'll see all year. And I'm absolutely giving The Holdovers a positive review. So guys, that is going to do it for my review of The Holdovers. I absolutely recommend this to a certain audience. Believe me, if you've ever heard the saying that a certain film is suited for a specific audience, like a target audience, this one has a target audience, and if it has that audience in it, it will absolutely follow you and stick with you. But yes, guys, that's going to do it for my review on this film. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on my review, as well as your thoughts for the film once it releases. But guys, with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. I hope you're all having a great day. Take care.